Winsenberg on the Weekend, News Radio 1040, WHO. Our next guest is Dr. Dan Neuharth. He's the author of a book called If You Had Controlling Parents. Dan is a psychologist and a family counselor. He lives in California, and he has appeared on many national television shows. He's been on Oprah, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But Dr. Neuharth, I want to talk about your book up front, If You Had Controlling Parents. Why don't you define for us right away what you would consider a controlling parent?
Well, a controlling parent is a parent who basically micromanages many, if not all, aspects of their children's lives, how they eat, how they dress, how they talk, what emotions are okay and not okay. And let me give you an example. There was, when I interviewed people for this book who are now adults but grew up with unhealthy control, one woman recalled how when she was 6, her mother put a sign on her back whenever the girl was out in public saying, "Don't feed me," because the mom was concerned that the girl, who was of normal weight, was going to gain weight.
Wow.
And that's an extreme example, but it also comes down to very everyday things that are sometimes very confusing to children when parents give mixed messages. For example, a father may say to his son, you got to stand up for yourself like a man in this world, but don't ever stand up to me.
Interesting. Now, is control something different from discipline? Because we all should be disciplinarians as parents.
Well, you have to be, and you have to have appropriate discipline. I mean, you have to tell your children that the stove is hot and don't touch it and don't go in traffic. What I'm talking about is not a factor in the majority of families, but in a sizable minority where it goes too far, where every little thing is controlled.
Okay, so what are some of the symptoms of a person who has had over-controlling parents?
Often, if you grew up with unhealthy control, you may find that in your adult life you may be excessively perfectionistic. You may find that it's hard to get close to other people even when you want to. You may find that you're driven, anxious, worried, afraid to make decisions because when you were a child, your decisions were always second-guessed or ridiculed.
You have every single word you just said describes me.
Uh-oh.
And I don't know what my parents are going to say about that. You have a little test in your book here that people can, when they buy the book, they can take this test, and you have 65 points, and I got a 36. So what does that tell you about me?
Well,
Come on, be honest.
I've had people who say I got 65 out of 65.
So 36 isn't bad, but it's cause for concern.
Yeah, I don't think it's really a question of good or bad. The only point of a book like mine or the test like that is it can be helpful in solving some of your current day problems, because I see so many people who come into my office, clients who are adults and who have some of the problems we were just talking about, and they don't make a connection to the way they were raised. And if you can, and sometimes there may be a connection, sometimes there may not be, but if there is a connection, and you can make that connection, you can begin to clear up current day problems at their source.
Well, that's interesting that you say that a lot of people don't connect it with how they were raised. Aren't we as a society going the other way, where we're starting to blame our parents for everything?
I think that has been, in the last 15, 20 years, there's been an excess of that. And I am clearly not out to blame or bash parents, and I don't do it. I don't do it in the book. I mean, being a parent is a very tough job. I think it's probably the toughest job around. But it's a question of understanding. No one's to blame. I mean, parents generally do the best they can. They may be repeating the way they were raised, and the way they were raised was not terribly healthy.
I hear this all the time. I see parents. I volunteer in the local elementary school, and I see kids who have been really mistreated by parents, kids who even have no discipline, whose parents just let them do whatever they want, and then they still come off saying, I did the best I can raising my kid. Do you really believe they did the best they could?
I think they did the best they could. The difficult, I think, sort of poignant problem that many of us have when we grow up is we realize that even though our parents did the best, it wasn't the best for us. And it wasn't good enough.
So somewhere we have to understand that in their mind they did do the best they could do, but it wasn't necessarily the best for us.
Exactly, and so they're not to blame, but also it's important. I tell people in my book that that it's important to remember that you're not responsible for what your parents did to you. They are. They were the adults. But at the same time, as an adult now, you are responsible for what you do with your life, and your parents aren't. And often if you were raised with a controlling parent and you're in your 30s or 40s or 50s, they may still be trying to control and, ask you about your social life or your finances or your food or things like that. Treating you like a child when you're not a child.
Right. Telling you where you can go at age 40, what you should do, what you should wear to go outside. You have a number of ways that parents control. Some make you feel guilty. Some withhold love from you, and that's a way of controlling. Some make you just downright scared to talk to them. They're so over-controlling and militaristic that you're scared to talk to them. You use the word cult-like. And that's kind of a hard word for some people to hear, but you're saying some parents actually are cult-like in how they almost brainwash their kids.
I found that in a lot of families, and what happens is the parents generally, one thing you'll hear from people who grew up with parents like that is, my dad or my mom would never admit they were wrong. They would never say the words, I don't know. And they always had to be sure about everything. And a small percentages of those parents may have been actually geniuses and Einsteins and did know everything, but I would say most of them, in fact, were quite afraid of being uncertain, and they saw the world in very all-or-nothing terms. Mm-hmm. And the problem is, if you grow up in that environment, you tend to think that that's normal.
Right.
You don't realize that that's not the only way to raise children.
That's right. Our guest is Dr. Dan Neuharth. The book is called If You Had Controlling Parents. And Dan, I feel a special connection to you, and that's because I went to University of South Dakota in Vermilion, and that, of course, is your dad's alma mater. And your dad is Al Neuharth, who is the founder of USA Today and was the chairman of Gannett and big multi-million-dollar moneymaker, owned lots of newspapers, and yet I understand he must have been quite a parent. You don't mention him much in the book, which I found fascinating because I think when you appeared on Oprah and he wrote a column about it later, it made it sound like you were really bashing him in the book, but you barely even mention your upbringing in the book.
Yeah, I only said a couple things because the book was really based on the people I interviewed, and it wasn't. This isn't a tell-all about my life. It's not a mommy dearest, and we did go on Oprah together, and we sort of agree to disagree. We have a friendly disagreement in terms of how I was raised. I mean, there are some funny things about it. I mean, my dad ran our family like a corporation. And, he would send us memos, my sister and I, when we were growing up, memos on the latest rules in the family. And if we wanted to see him on weekends, we had to schedule an appointment with him.
Oh, my gosh.
And some of those things, they were pretty extreme, but I can laugh about those. But I think that the thing that I share in common with a number of people who grew up controlled is that there was a pretty tight rein in our family in terms of you really weren't allowed to show tears or fears. You had to be careful what you said and when you said. And
there probably wasn't a lot of love shown then either, right? Not lots of affection.
There was not open affection. I mean, we didn't get hugged a lot or told that we were loved. And I think that's how my dad was raised.
But your dad's point, and I've got his column right here in front of me, your dad's point is Dan has a successful career as a print and broadcast journalist, a university professor, and a family therapist, and he's basically blaming me. I mean, it's like, hey, he turned out okay. But I think your dad kind of missed the point. You didn't blame anybody. You went, I think, bent over backwards to make sure everybody understood. You're not blaming parents. You're just trying to get people to understand why they are the way they are.
And I think that's one of the hardest things if you grow up in a family like this is often you can't really talk about it with your parents because they do feel blamed even when you're not blaming them.
Yes.
They have a different mindset. They have a different generation. They have a different set of values. And in some ways you just sort of have to proceed on your own and find ways to emotionally leave home.
He basically says that you're remembering things a certain way and that he doesn't think it was that way.
Like I say, we agree to disagree.
So what's his impact been on you? You don't have kids, right?
No, I don't.
And do you think that has been part of that impact?
I think that was part of it, and I hear that from a number of people, certainly a minority, but a number of people who grew up with unhealthy control, is that, if you grew up in a position where your childhood was very, very difficult, you think twice or three times or four times before inflicting that on another child. I think that's unfortunate, but I think it's also a fact.
Yeah. I really like some of your solutions. You just right up front say you should be confrontational sometimes. Most of the books I've read, when it talks about dealing with your parents, it says, be very careful, don't be confrontational. And you say, hey, confrontational can be okay sometimes, right?
Confrontation, if you do it for you. In other words, you're not going to change your parents. They spent many years trying to control you, and it didn't work very well. What makes you think you can change them? But some people feel a need to just say their piece, just for themselves, say whatever they have to say to their parents. It probably won't change anything, but you may feel better, and especially if you say it, with respect, not in a blaming way.
Yeah, and you do a nice job, I think, outlining in the book some of the ways that you can do it respectfully. You also say something that surprised me. Forgiveness is optional.
I'm not a big fan of forced or premature forgiveness. I think if you forgive someone before you're ready, it can perpetuate some of the hurt that happened. My focus more is on emotionally letting go, and forgiveness is one way to do that, but it's not the only way. You don't have to forgive people who hurt you, particularly if they continue to hurt you.
Mm-hmm. And then you also suggest that people try to remove themselves and be objective. Take a period where you can observe your parents objectively. For instance, when you went home for a christening and you just took 2 days and observed your dad as objective as you could be, and that helped, didn't it?
I went, this is about 3 or 4 years ago, and I went home and I decided to just simply count the number of times my dad said or did a controlling thing. And he lives in Florida, I live in California. I showed up, and within the first 5 minutes, I had counted about 15 or 20 things, just to myself.
Now, how did that help you?
Well, it made me, when you're there as an observer, you don't have to sort of fight or argue back or do anything, because anything that happens is useful information for you to learn from.
Yes.
And if you're there to learn, you don't have to get caught up in the emotional part of it.
And it can also help the healing process, too, I think. Well, thanks so much for being with us, Dr. Dan Neuharth. The book is called If You Had Controlling Parents, on Winsenberg on the Weekend.